Hey friends, Matt here, and in this video I want to show you how you can create your own acid bass sound using stock plugins inside of Ableton Live, including Ableton Live's Drift synthesizer. Real quick before we get into it, I actually just released an online mini course all about the fundamentals of bass sound design for electronic music, so if you want to learn more about bass sound design techniques, check out that course in the link in the description. Otherwise, let's get into showing you how you can create your very own acid bass sounds in Ableton Live. Okay, so here I've got a track inside of Ableton Live with a MIDI pattern on it, just a kind of simple acid bass pattern. Let's add an Ableton Live Drift onto this MIDI track and have a listen to what the pattern sounds like. Obviously at the moment it just sounds not fantastic because we've got so many overlapping notes. Let's go ahead and make our sound. So the first thing we want to do, because this is a bass sound, I'm going to go ahead and change my mode here to mono so that we only have one note playing at once, and instantly that's going to change the sound for us. So now let's go ahead and create the acid sound. So what I'm going to do is just remove the second oscillator from the equation here by turning down the level of oscillator 2. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove the modulation sources on this filter frequency just by double clicking here and here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull the sustain of envelope 1 all the way down, as well as the release. So now we just have this really plucky kind of envelope going on. So with our oscillator 1 set to a sawtooth wave, I'm going to set the oscillator 1 level to 0 dB. That's going to drive the filter a little bit as well. Then I'm going to pull the low pass filter frequency pretty much all the way down to maybe around 50 or so hertz. And now we can't really hear the sound. So what we're going to do now is use our envelope 1, which is that kind of already plucky envelope, which is controlling the amplitude of the sound, to also control the cutoff of the low pass filter. So to do this, I'm going to go to the frequency mod section, select envelope 1 from the first drop down menu, and then just increase this percentage value right here. And we'll start to get a kind of plucky type sound. And now for the kind of secret sauce of the acid sound, I'm going to go ahead and increase this resonance control really, really high. And we're going to start to get that kind of squelchy movement that you get in a typical acid bass sound. So now we have the kind of fundamentals of the acid sound together. Let's go ahead and finesse this just a little bit. The first thing we're going to do is turn on the legato mode in Drift, which is basically going to make it so that every time we have overlapping notes in a sequence, this filter movement is not actually going to re-trigger on the new note. Instead, it's going to overlap across the new notes. And then we can also play around with this glide control here beneath the legato control. And what this is going to do is mean that the pitch is going to actually slide between these two overlapping notes as well. If we open up the MIDI clip that we've got here, we can see that these higher notes here, most of them are actually overlapping with the lower notes that come after them, or even in the case here at bar 4, we have these two higher notes overlapping. So we're going to start to get these kind of slides between these notes on both the filter and in the pitch if we go back to here and just increase this glide now that we have the legato turned on as well. I'm going to go ahead and turn the velocity to volume down a little bit and just increase the output volume of the synthesizer all the way up to 0 dB. Awesome. So now we want to get a little bit more dynamic movement into the synthesizer, and to do this, we're going to control a few parameters with the velocity of the incoming MIDI notes. So again, if we switch back to this MIDI clip that I have, we can see that all of these different MIDI notes actually have different velocities, with the high notes having a really high or maximum velocity of 127. And what I want to do is have the velocity control various parameters of the synthesizer, things like the cutoff, the modulation amount, and the decay of the envelope. So let's go back to our Drift synthesizer. Firstly, let's have the velocity control the cutoff frequency of the low pass filter by coming down to the frequency mod section, selecting velocity from this second drop down menu, and then just increasing this percentage slightly. I don't want to have it hugely affect the cutoff, but it is nice here to actually have this be the case. And so now we can hear that with those higher velocity notes, we actually have a more open low pass filter. Next, what I want to do is actually have velocity control this parameter here, this frequency modulation from envelope 1, and also the decay length of the envelope. Now, unfortunately, I can't do that directly inside of Drift, but what I can do is use the Expression Control Max for Live device to use velocity to control these different parameters. So let's go ahead and add the Expression Control device before Drift here, and we can see that this by default first source is set to velocity. I'm going to go ahead and map this to the decay of envelope 1. And now a higher velocity is going to increase the decay of the envelope, which is going to mean that these notes actually hold out for a little bit longer and we get a little bit more dynamic movement in the sound. We can control the range within which this decay is changed by coming to the output range in the expression control and just pulling down this level percentage here. And now you can hear we get a lot more dynamic movement in the sound. Let's do the same with the modulation to the filter from this envelope. So I'm going to go ahead here and come down to the second tab in the expression control where it says press, change the source from pressure to velocity, and map this to the depth that the envelope is controlling the filter with this little percentage slider right here. And once again, we're going to adjust the amounts here to taste. So I'm going to pull down the output range slightly. And I'm also going to pull down the starting position of this depth just a little bit so that we have some more range within which to control this depth. What I can also do here is play around with the velocity curve affecting these different parameters. For instance, I can have the curve here on this expression control for the velocity towards the modulation amount increased, which means that only the really high velocities are going to throw this frequency modulation depth wide open. I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the velocity controlling the decay. And now we have the fundamental acid sound that we can start to play around with even more. For instance, we can play around with changing the resonance control to get a more or less kind of squelchy sound. I could change the filter type here by clicking on this type control to get a different characteristic. Or I could even add a high pass filter here to just remove some of those low frequencies and get a little bit more of a bitey sound. Now let's go ahead and add the kind of secret sauce of an acid sound, which is the distortion. So for this, I'm going to use Ableton Live's saturator and put this after the drift synthesizer. Then I'm going to come down to this clipping section here where it says no clip and turn on the soft clip mode. And this is going to clip the sound on the output of the saturator. And then I'm going to come to this drop down here and actually change this to bass shaper. And I find this particular mode works really well on acid sounds and other bass sounds like this. And then we can just start to increase the drive to get a little bit more distortion to the sound. And then in order to change the characteristics of this distortion, what I'm actually going to do is put an EQ before the saturator and shape the sound going into the saturator to shape how the distortion is affecting the sound. For this, I'm going to use the channel EQ, which is available in every single edition of Ableton Live. I'm going to pull down the low frequencies, pull down the high frequencies a little bit, and also increase the mid frequencies and start to move the mid frequency position until I get a really bitey tone. You can get more surgical with this EQ if you wanted, but you can hear there how having the EQ really affects the sound of the saturator. And then we can go ahead and adjust parameters of the synthesizer, such as the high pass filter and the resonance and the frequency, etc., to again change the sound even more. From here, you could try things like changing the shape of the first oscillator from a sawtooth wave to maybe something like a square wave. Changing the pulse width with the shape control. Or even choosing from a different shape, such as maybe a pulse wave here. And you can even try adding some things like delay and reverb to give this sound even more space. And there you have it. That is how you can create your very own acid-based sound using simple devices and synthesizers inside of any edition of Ableton Live. If you'd love to learn more about the fundamentals of bass sound design for electronic music, check out my course in the description. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Stay awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.